You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to episode 122 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I'm Dave Roberts. With me, as always, is my podcast partner in crime, writer, journalist. Well, I was going to say comedian based on some of your posts lately, Jessica Szilagyi.
I thought that you were just running out of things because, you change it up every week, but have I been funnier?
Yes, I think the frustration's finally coming through with some of the comedy in your posts.
Speaking of comedy, I got a little notification, I think it was on Friday, on Facebook in my memories that it was 1 year since my mouse incident in the house, and of course I thought it was only going to last one day and it ended up lasting 5, but I've really grown a lot as a person since that happened.
Mousegate 2019.
It was tough.
Yeah, I don't like vermin.
Vernon, me either.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
How's your week?
It was okay. I mean, the legislature was back. We'll talk about it, but it's such a miserable time when they're around and in existence. But
and when they're in existence.
Yeah, we get to forget about, at least they went home when we had all this stuff with COVID. Like, we got a break from that. We were dealing with local governments and Kemp's orders and stuff, but at least they gave us a reprieve from that. Now they're back with a vengeance.
Yeah, but had they stayed, it would have been ripping the Band-Aid off.
I know.
Of course, they'd be calling a special session. But no, my week was great. It was beautiful in Metro Atlanta last week. I know you had some storms, but it was beautiful up here. Low humidity, reasonable temperatures. If you were a golfer, it'd be a great time to be on the links.
In between our storms, we had some amazing temperatures, like cool, breezy nights and not blistering hot days. I saw someone say, like, I think we'll end up paying for this at the end of August and early September when it'll still be like 140, but, and no, I'm not being dramatic or anything, but that's usually how it is.
I'm all for it.
Of course you are.
I profit off the suffering of others. No. So we have a few updates on stories from the past few episodes. Budget.
Yeah, so last week we took a real deep dive into the budget, but, Friday wrapped up, which was day 34 for the legislature, so they technically have 6 legislative days left, and they still don't have a budget. They're still trying to, quote, iron out the details of, what they're going to cut and by how much, and I think even before they adjourned, I really harped on the fact they were coming after the public defender's budget, because before the COVID hit, they were going to hurt that budget, and we found out that they want to eliminate the appellate division entirely, which is about $977,000, and then they're going to eliminate $1 million just general budget for expert witnesses, which I think we talked about that as well on the show, and I know that I've written about it because we see time and time again where the state has a laundry list of witnesses that they bring in from the GBI crime labs and from, forensic experts and all these things. And when someone has a public defender, the budget is already so limited, and experts can't work for free. Some of them do, or they'll give a reduced rate for public defender clients, but it's already a super slim budget, and they're wanting to cut it by $1 million. So just those two things is about $2 million off the budget. So, it's true to form for the legislature that they have all this garbage, and the things that are guaranteed to us under the Constitution at the state and federal level is one of the biggest things on the chopping block. and they actually, I think you'll find this entertaining, they actually wrote in the budget document that the $1 million expert witness cost, they're just deferring that to the counties. Like, as if it's not actually happening, they're just transferring it to the counties. But, I mean, you know as well as I do, there's no extra money just sitting around. Not for that kind of stuff.
So you have a right to call a rebuttal witness, but not the funds.
Right, so good luck finding a volunteer. And like I said, that does happen. I mean, there really are good people who donate their time to help, whether they agree with, I mean, to truly present on the facts, like not whether or not they think the person's innocent. It's not about that. They really do. The medical examiners, all of them, but they can't work for free all the time, understandably. And when you cut the budget like this, you're cutting the ability to even reimburse them for their time and travel, not necessarily their actual service or analysis. So,
well, and there are a lot of crimes that are
bummed.
socioeconomic. I mean, simple possession. If you can afford a good attorney, I mean, that's either going to get gone. I mean, it just depending on the facts of the case, of course. DUI, I tend to believe is a poor person's crime, poor man's crime. If you can afford to hire a good attorney, you're going to end up with something reduced. It's going to end up cost you money. But there are lots of crimes like that, but you just can't afford to fight it. So we see it all the time with cases. Again, I quoted the Michael Flynn case last week, but at a certain point, like Flynn was out of money. Fine, I plead guilty. I'll just get it over with. I just can't afford it. And you take that, you look at it with somebody who works for a living, is the provider, and it's easier for him to go ahead and plead guilty and do 6 months in jail than to exhaust every bit of resource he has, because the public defenders don't have a budget to bring in a witness to rebut, or even to spend any time with you. You may meet your public defender at your first court appearance.
Yeah, and again, I understand that everyone is taking a hit now, but I think I would be, I wouldn't be, because again, this is a constitutional protection in place for innocent people who have not been convicted of a crime at the time that they're using this service, or this, I don't even know what you would, I guess the expert would, I don't know what to define it as, but the public defender's office was on the chopping block before COVID. So, at least don't do any more damage than you were already proposing. But they made it worse.
Well, it's low-hanging fruit because it's not, if you cut prosecutors, or you cut, that's, you're soft on crime. I really hate the fact that we need a public defender's office. I do. I wish they didn't need to exist.
Yeah.
But, the fact is we do. I wish they didn't have the caseload they do. I wish we didn't prosecute minor crimes. If they were handled administratively or not crimes at all. We could take a huge load off of our courts with some real changes in our code. But I also live in the world of reality, and this is the world we live in, and people are charged with crimes, and there are people who are falsely accused who just don't have the means to fight it. So, without harping too much of that, because I think we've hit on that one a few times, the hate crime legislation.
Well, we've hit on this a good bit too. I think we also talked about it last week, but I mean, hold my beer and let me make this worse. So, I'm sure that a lot of people saw Ralston on Fox News blasting the Senate for not acting. He's doing the whole, it's been over there for 466 days or whatever the case may be. I don't freaking know, but just pandering like crazy on Fox News while also interjecting himself in a story we're going to talk about later. But Tuesday they burned an entire day because they used the Rules Committee to have a 4-minute meeting and say that it's an embarrassment for the state not to pass this, and that the state reps need to put pressure on their senators, and they have a constitutional obligation to pass the budget and a moral obligation to pass the hate crime legislation. And, as we talked about last week, they passed it out of the House and sent it over to the Senate last year, and it's just been sitting there. So obviously now the Senate is revising it themselves, and Jeff Duncan took it upon himself to, I guess, be the leader of this rodeo, and he held a press conference where he unveiled his ideas, and we'll talk about the revisions, but I just want to quote what he said. As a man of faith, I believe we are called to treat others...
Stop right there. Stop. No. As a man of faith, up yours. If you have to lead with that qualifier, because that phrase right there is used to duck any criticism coming at you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that phrase right there is one of the things that me off. As a man of faith, if you're a man of faith, you don't need to tell me. I can see it. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
No, you're totally right. And that also implies that people who aren't of faith or any type of spiritual belief system are not capable of being called to do what he's, it's a moral superiority thing. But anyway, as a man of faith, I believe we are called to treat others as we'd want to be treated, but to also stand up for the vulnerable, to comfort the afflicted, and welcome the welcome the ostracized. I believe this legislation answers that call, and I will work hand in hand with legislators in both parties, in both houses, to ensure we get this over the finish line. There is no way to ignore the sense of urgency and the desire and the immediate need for the strongest hate crimes law in the country to show up on our books here in Georgia. And I'm not going to read what I said after that, but it is one of the most disgusting justifications, and it wouldn't even matter if it was a bill that I supported. The way that he's teeing it up is disgusting.
He wants to be on both sides of the issue. They didn't pass it last year because honestly, it's garbage legislation. It is garbage legislation. And we're not going to rehash last week, but nobody has any consistency here. Nobody has any ethics. I can't say he doesn't have any morals. He doesn't have any ethics in this. Because we're called treat others as we'd like to be treated. Well, yeah, fairly, within the eyes of the law is exactly how I want to be treated. I don't need a golden rule to be preached to me from the floor of the Senate. What I need is government to get out of the way and protect individual rights. That's it.
And right. And
so
his whole idea of if you go line by line with his quote, which I'm not going to harp on that but his quote is based on the language they used in the bill. And so when he's talking about that the legislation answers the call of comforting the afflicted and welcoming the ostracized and standing up for the vulnerable. Standing up for the vulnerable, none of those things are actually the role of government. If the courts are supposed to be, and the justice system are supposed to be used to hold people accountable, but none of the things he mentioned are actually the proper role of government. But here's what
standing up for the vulnerable goes back to what we were just talking about with the public defender's office.
Sure. Yeah. So it empowers victims and communities and makes a hate crime a standalone criminal charge for crimes deemed bias motivated. So if you remember last week when we really examined what it was a sentence enhancer for race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, mental disability, or physical disability, actual or perceived, of those, bias against for those purposes. And it was, if you were sentenced under one of those things, you could get a stiffer fine and a longer term in jail or prison, depending on what crime you committed. So if you committed a misdemeanor, you might make it a high and aggravated and get more jail time. Well, this makes it its own OCGA statute and offense. So you would be charged, if you went after somebody because of their sexual orientation, you would be, and you beat them up, you would be charged with assault or battery, depending on, whatever. And then also a hate crime, like an OCGA, a hate crime offense. And so you would be charged.
It's going to be thrown out.
When you, well,
it's just
yes.
like the violation of oath of office is they will find you. They can find you guilty of hate crime and find you not guilty of aggravated assault.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the problem too, I mean, you're not the problem, but the issue here is that you're making a new crime with new sentencing and fines and punishments. So it's a new statute, but it's literally doing the same thing as they proposed before. And like you said, you're allowing them to split the difference so they could say, well, it didn't meet the threshold of, aggravated assault, so we're going to find them not guilty, but we do think there was hate there, so you're going to prison for 1 to 5 years, and here's your fine. Well, hating somebody on its own is not a crime. So if it's just like the violation of oath in that that's a non-criminal act, hating someone. That's it. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but the House version was better.
Less bad. It was less bad. At least it was a sentence enhancer, not.
At least you had to be found guilty of the crime to have a sentence. This is not conditional. It is standalone.
And again, we're talking about punishing thought.
Right.
Not action.
And so not only are the ones that we mentioned of the actual and perceived reasons, they're also adding culture, experiencing homelessness, the status of serving in the armed forces, participating in civil rights activities, or exercising First Amendment rights. So if you're targeted for any of those reasons, you can have this additional statute tacked on to your charges.
Wait a minute. So if you beat my ass, you can say, well,
because you were running your mouth.
Well, because I'm a veteran. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's the First Amendment, so you have a First Amendment to speak. So if somebody calls me a name and I pop them in the mouth, ooh, that's a hate crime. They were using their First Amendment rights to call you what they want to call you. Now he was asking for me to bust him in the nose. That's a tough one, but get on with Stacey Evans. She seems to agree with me.
So she's a Democrat. She's the one that, if you guys don't recall, she's the one that ran against Stacey Abrams in the primary for the governor's race a couple years ago, and she actually is headed back to the legislature. She just won her primary, I think, but she said Jeff Duncan adding these categories virtually ensures the laws will be struck down as too vague. That was the fate of the last Georgia hate crimes law in 2004 when we had one and it was struck down by the courts. Let's not go there again. Pass the bill as it was passed the House, and let's do some bipartisan good, please. Obviously, I disagree with her wanting the bill at all, but I think she's totally right because, the whole reason that they identified race, color, religion, national origin, sexual, those have become standards in federal courts, in state courts. Obviously, we just saw with the Supreme Court ruling last week, like, those are acceptable things. Adding homelessness, culture, the status of serving in the armed forces, all these civil rights activities, that slope just went from slippery to a full-on drop-off.
Okay. Theory. Alex Jones theory.
No,
Maybe he wants to write
it's
it
not. No.
He wants to get credit.
No.
And have it struck down.
No, that's not it. Sorry. He's not that. I knew where you were going, and I appreciate it. And I will say, it crossed my mind. However, first of all, I would be more inclined to believe that, except that we talked about his statement last week where he was talking about making it a civil thing, and he wanted to weigh his options. And I mean, he's been all over the map with this, like not really just sticking his thumb out in the wind. and we're going to talk about it later, so I don't want to spoil it. Technically, I mean, the officer in the Rayshard Brooks case is not, if he's already been charged and he'll go before grand jury before any of this actually becomes law, even if they do pass it. But it could fall into, they could charge him with a hate crime too. Like, that's how broad this is.
Right.
Anything could fall into this.
Well, that's kind of where I read it is. There is no, they covered everybody. Especially when they talk about your First Amendment right. I mean, if you get punched for running your mouth, now it's 5 years. Again,
I think that don't get me wrong. Like, when people do things that are illegal and they're held accountable, I'm glad to see them held accountable. And I don't think we have room for hate in our society. And I shouldn't have to justify why I'm against hate crimes. It's not because I'm supportive of racist or bigots or anything else. It's that I don't know how to say this without somebody losing their mind.
No, here's which you're standing on principle. The law is garbage legislation. It's principle. Justice is blind. It's principle. It has nothing to do with defending bad people. It is defending the principle that we are all equal in the eyes of the law, and we are all due equal protection under the law, regardless of our race, creed, color, sexual orientation, hair color, eye color, how you dress, your socioeconomic status. We're all due equal protection under the law.
Absolutely.
And that principle is a solid principle to stand by. And we tend to get wrapped up in this race part of it. It's like, no, it has nothing to do with it. It's principle.
Well, and it's going to be really interesting because it was supposed to be on the floor of the Senate last week and on Friday, and then of course it will have to go back to the House because of the changes. But it will be interesting because Democrats, by and large, oppose the creation of any new statute because, ironically, they think we have too many laws and they think that they're biased against persons of color and minorities and all of these lists that they list out every time something like this comes forward. And so they oppose making something a standalone crime because they think we have enough laws on the books and the criminal justice system is overloaded. But here we are, with a garbage piece of on-fire garbage, and they're not going to vote no.
I don't know how they're going to reconcile the two bills in 6 legislative days, but what do I know?
I have wondered if this will go to a conference committee where they send, 3 from each side into a room and tell them to come to some negotiations. Certainly some lawyer in the House. We've got, as much as I don't like their big government policies, we have some very smart lawyers who, on these types of things, will say, pump the brakes. This isn't going to work. And I'm hoping that somebody in the House will, because we're going to get this, whether we want it or not. So hopefully they can improve it. But it all we kind of got off in the weeds, but it will also allow victims to recover damages by allowing them to seek a hate crime charge from a grand jury if the local prosecutors choose not to press the charge. And we have that process anyway. Like, you can request to go before the grand jury, but the prosecutors weigh in on it, and it's a very complicated process that almost never happens. But this would allow them to it'd be like this, and I'm using these words loosely, so please don't take me literally, but it's like getting an essential court order for you to take over to civil court and be like, look, this grand jury said that this person did this in a course of hate, and so now I want to sue. And then also it requires officers to submit reports, which I don't really understand that component because officers already have to write reports, but it's the Twilight Zone, so we'll just add it.
Of course, Georgia, Indiana, Utah, Wyoming are the only states without a hate crimes bill or law. We have vehicle bills.
I touched on that last week about what a vehicle bill is, but It's when we've already made a bill over by crossover. They're not supposed to be introducing any new bills. So what they do is they draft a bill, have it, with the language they want. They know it can't go anywhere. So they take a bill, like the House will take a Senate bill, gut it, put language in it that has nothing to do with the original intent, and send it through and pass something that way. It's a shady, unethical way to pass legislation, but as of Friday, there were at least 3 in the House. One of them was to make it so that for the next year, we can have juries of 6 instead of 12, so that if both parties agree, so that we can adhere to social distancing in our courthouses, and they can call in smaller pools of juries instead of calling in 120 people. That's just one example, which it sounds practical, but I gave it a red on principle alone, because that's not how you pass legislation. And if you wanted to have COVID-related bills because we had these COVID pressing measures, then they should have, instead of just giving Brian Kemp automatic renewal of his state of emergency, they should have reconvened and had a special session as they were supposed to with the law, and address these things that they say are so important. They should have done that, but they didn't want to do that because they're lazy and they wanted to campaign instead, and they want to give Kemp all the power. And so here we are with vehicle bills, and so all of them are getting reds.
On a different
They're
subject.
not all practical, though. So, sorry.
The ammo company ammo.com says it has a 3-year partnership with the National African American Gun Association, the NAAGA, and I'm not pronouncing that acronym, that provides unique insight into the ammo buying habits of their members following the death of George Floyd. The trend, the company says, is upward.
So we put this on All on Georgia, and I thought it was super interesting for a number of reasons, just the timing of the press release and the subject matter. And I mean, this is my own ignorance, but I had not heard of that organization. I'd heard of ammo.com, but it's more of a segue into the next topic we're going to talk about. But I just thought it was interesting that, I think that with everything going on, that guns and ammunition are being purchased, I know they are, at higher rates than usual. But this organization has 40,000 members. It was started in Atlanta with 30 people, and now they have 112 chapters. And not everyone is African American, but more than half of them are women, and 1,000 are law enforcement and military. And it said that 2,000 people joined in the 36 hours after George Floyd, and they're getting folks from all over. And it said that I guess they have like a partnership where I don't know, if when you check out, you denote that you have that, or if they have a reduced rate or whatever it may be. But they said that they've had since Memorial Day, basically, they've had a 260% increase in traffic on their site from those members alone. And that's obviously not the only site. So I just, their transactions are up 350%, and like every type of ammo is up. So.
And people who have never been gun owners before are buying guns. You can't find a damn pump shotgun because the states where it's difficult to get a repeating firearm, shotguns are typically permitted, and the folks that are there are buying them as fast as they can. Plus, you don't have to be a particularly good marksman to use a shotgun. But they're flying off the shelves. I see reports on Facebook every day of, people who've never owned an AR before buying ARs. I got a phone call yesterday saying, "Hey, I've got some guns I use for the range, but I need something to carry with me. What can you suggest for a concealable piece?" I mean, I'm seeing it in my life. It would be interesting to see the uptick. Versus, I don't know. I don't know how you would say that. I'd hate to say, well, how many white people versus black people buying ammo? Well, that's not really a fair comparison. Because it's also a kind of it's people who are scared and want to protect their families, and it's something that
sure.
We all have in common, that we want to keep our families safe. and something we should, would be much nicer to focus on.
And I think I totally agree. I just think that there's a misconception that only white rednecks are buying guns and have stockpiles and all this stuff. And that's just simply not the case. And I should clarify, white redneck males. That's the image of a gun owner. And I don't like segregating people out, but I do appreciate one that you don't have. I mean, anybody can be in this group or in this organization a member, obviously, because they want to collect money because it's dues paying. But, I appreciate that more than 50% of it is women, and that it's an organization of blacks that also has members of law enforcement in the military in it right now. And it just doesn't fit the mold and the narrative. And so that's why I appreciate it more than anything. Plus 40,000 members. That's great.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Now, as we get into other topics, we remind everybody these are our opinions and not necessarily those of All on Georgia, and certainly not those of any All on Georgia reporter or any human being not offering commentary on this show. And if you like what you hear, please like and share us on social media. Give us a comment. Finally, drop us a like.
Finally. Thank you for saying that, Dave. It's been 8 weeks since you've said that. Thank you
for keeping up with that. So
I have a chart. Instead of reminding you, I just put a little tally for every week you forget.
Last week's big story. Once again, making national headlines, once again from Georgia. The officer-involved shooting in the city of Atlanta that resulted in the death of Rayshard Brooks.
So, I think everybody knows what happened. I mean, everyone has a different opinion of what happened, but they know what we're talking about. And I don't know when you saw it. I saw it the morning after, and it was one of those things where you're just like, damn it. Because you know that the conversation is going to be emotional and loud and national right away. And I'm disappointed for that, because the conversations have been irrational and emotional and loud and national.
But a couple things that I mean, the narrative has been as false. Number one, asleep in the Wendy's drive-thru. No, you're passed out. I mean, call it what it is. I mean, I've been in some long drive-thru lines. I've never fallen asleep. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I were talking before the show. He was given the opportunity just to pull off and take sleep it off, and he couldn't even do that without running off into the bushes.
Correct. And the initial interaction was polite and respectful, and not heated, no yelling, compliant. And it all went to hell in a handbasket really quick. Really quick.
And it shows what we hear from police officers every day is you never know when it's going to get sideways.
That's right.
You go from 1 minute of telling a joke and then the next minute you're in a tussle. You're going to fight for your life. So he gets a hold of a taser, and you have a note here. Taser is listed as a firearm under Georgia law.
It is.
And turns around. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's the biggest point of contention, and it's not just the fault of. I mean, there's been a lot of misstatements about what a taser is. I don't know if you're going to get it. Maybe I'm talking too soon. You finish giving the analysis, and then I'll come back to it.
Well, he gets the taser away from the original responding officer, and starts to book it. And he turns around and he points the weapon at the responding officer, and his partner, who came to assist on the scene, fires. And another piece that we keep hearing in the press over and over and over again, giving a misconception, is shot in the back. Well, that was the angle that he had when Mr. Brooks turned around and pointed a weapon at another officer. That's the angle he had. It's not that he didn't shoot somebody running away. And the videotape has been, whenever you see it on TV, has been slowed down to make it look like he had an eternity to decide whether to shoot or not. But when you watch it in real time, it is quite literally bang, bang.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, everyone said, well, he was turning back around it was in the back and he was turning back around when the officer shot. Well, if you've ever shot a gun, or if you've ever gone through police training or any of these things, you know that there's like a response time. It takes time to pull your gun out of your holster and point it and shoot it. But that still all happened very quickly. And I don't think it could have been stopped in the period that they're claiming it could have been stopped, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. The initial action to send that ordnance downrange was already happening by the time, when we looked at slow motion, that he may have been starting to turn away. This isn't a football game where we're going to do an instant replay to see if the toe was out of bounds when he caught the ball. This is you have to look at it in real time, and it is a heartbeat. A heartbeat. Maybe he was turning back around. Maybe he wouldn't have turned. Maybe he was about to give up. We'll never know. And I've done. They don't use FATS anymore, but I've done FATS training, and that's one of the things you try to learn is. And first time I did it, I lit somebody up that if they played the scenario out was going to surrender. So and they're like, Roberts, they were going to surrender. Well, I guess they won't now. And of course, it's cavalier as in the Army at the time. It's a heartbeat.
It is, and what's really frustrating is that this happened at 10:30 at night. Of course, the GBI was called to the scene. By the time the GBI let people really know about what was going on, I think, or like in terms of a press statement and all of that, I think it was early hours of the morning. And by mid-morning, the mayor is saying that, she didn't feel like it was the right thing and that it wasn't justified, while the GBI is literally like still on the scene and processing things and calling questions and all of that. And the GBI is usually pretty tight-lipped, but after the chief resigned, and Keisha's on TV blistering the cops and firing the cops, the GBI did the right thing, I think, in this case, at releasing the surveillance camera, and ultimately the body cam a couple hours later, so that people could see for themselves. And because the narrative had already started that because the first video we saw was a cell phone video that went viral. I don't know if you recall that, but when the shooting actually happened, it was off screen. But everyone was saying, well, we can deduce that this person was running away, and we can conclude this, and all these, things, when we couldn't see what was happening on camera. So the surveillance that we ended up seeing from Wendy's was pretty darn clear about those very few seconds. And I don't think it changed a lot of people's opinions, but I think it tilted a lot of people who were on the fence, like square in favor of the officer.
And we also find out towards the end of last week, that contrary to the idea that they were stepping on him and all this stuff, that the body cam footage shows them rendering aid and yelling at him to breathe. Mm-hmm. Look, it is, taking a life is a hell of a thing, and it's a traumatic experience for the family. It's a traumatic experience for the officer involved. That wasn't his goal. In fact, for the responding officer, his goal was to let the guy sleep it off and roll on with his evening. It certainly was not to get in a fist fight with this guy. And the initial interaction shows they have no animosity towards this guy. That this is, and I guarantee you it's not APD policy after someone is obviously intoxicated, after obviously operating a motor vehicle, to cut them loose. That goes back to qualified immunity. He's got to follow APD policy, and that person would have been a hazard back in his car.
Right. It's super frustrating.
And also, he gets violent when he drinks. So,
right.
What would have happened if this guy went back to his house and beat up his kids? What happens? Beat up his family? They would have been the first ones saying, like you said before we started recording, "Oh, the system failed us. The system failed us." They cut him loose. There's just no winning. And to quote a friend of mine, I wouldn't take that job if it paid well.
Sure. And, then on top of that, we saw where the officers, both of them were charged, and one of them with freaking felony murder. But the GBI came out swinging after, because Paul Howard is the one that signed the warrants for their arrest and for the 11 charges against Garrett Rolfe. And the GBI came out and said, we're not done with our investigation. We're still going to complete our investigation because that's how this is done. And of course, we had a bunch of people come on and say, well, people get arrested during investigations all the time. And they're absolutely right. But the difference is that when the GBI is investigating something and they decide to arrest you in the middle of the investigation, it's because they have all the information that they think they need to arrest you. And I'm not saying they get it right all the time, but they're the investigating agency. It is entirely different for Paul Howard to get up there and say, I'm going to sign warrants for these people when I don't know all the facts. I know that an agency is still investigating, and I'm going to do it without communicating with them. That's just... He has single-handedly compromised more of the investigation and the trial and everything. Though they won't be able to try that in Fulton County.
And they've empowered the mob. Mm-hmm. They're so worried about having more riots, having another Wendy's burned down, turning back into Minneapolis. He wants to be reelected. The mayor came off running her mouth without all the facts. And they are absolutely capitulating to the mob. And that's not how justice works. That's not how it's supposed to work anyway. So we have partisan politics, proposed police reforms in Congress. So you put out this handy dandy chart for the proposal for police reforms at the national level.
Yes, I did, because I was trying to write an article about it, and I was like, I know that some people are like, well, I support the Republican version because I'm a Republican, but I don't think like that. I want to see what each one has side by side. So I made a chart because I love charts, and then I put an obnoxious watermark on it because I know that people screenshot charts, and I worked really hard on it, and I wanted people to know. So anyway, there's the Republican Justice Act and then the Democratic Justice and Policing Act, and they're both over 100 pages, which is wild. Especially when you consider that the feds really don't have a role in policing other than their own federal police or federal level police and funding that they put strings on. But Trump has said that qualified immunity, getting rid of that at the federal level is a non-starter for him. So that's not in the Republican one, but it's in the Democrat version. Interesting, and maybe you knew this, but I didn't. In Georgia, it's illegal for a guard to engage in a sexual act, or guard or cop or anybody, with somebody whom they have in custody or taken into custody or they have detained. That's not the case at the federal level, so that's actually one thing that's in the bill, that you can't consent. The Democrats want to create a accreditation program for law enforcement agencies based on Obama's 21st century policing reforms that he brought up in way back in 2015. The Republicans want to come up with a standard curriculum, which we basically already have. I mean, it's not like policing is that different amongst states. There are some things that are different, but by and large, it's the same. the feds or the Democrats want to require all federal officers to wear body cams and have a dash cam if they're in a marked vehicle. And then they want to, I love this, they want to require state and local agencies to use their extra money to buy cameras. Again, there's not a whole lot of extra money sitting around in police budgets.
Particularly right now.
Right. They want to ban the use of no-knock warrants, but only in federal drug cases, and then they'll prohibit federal funding for state and local agencies if they don't ban no-knock warrants for drug cases. Now, in Georgia, they're already not permitted. We don't have any statutes on the books, so they're not permitted, but they use them. But I thought that it was interesting, like, you know, they're horrible, terrible things, but we're going to prohibit them, but just for drugs.
And I don't know, I mean, obviously, immigration agents use them. You can't ban them for everything. You can't ban them for kidnapping because you obviously if you had somebody, you know, you need to surprise them. Obviously, if you're trying to take somebody alive that's suspected of murder, you can't. I don't know that you can ban them for that.
Okay, but don't those sometimes fall under exigent circumstances?
They do. I mean, look, I don't like no-knock warrants. I think they're problematic at best. They're dangerous to everyone involved. And it assumes that the intelligence is always right. And nothing is always right. So I don't like no-knock warrants. And obviously, I put a premium on keeping our officers safe. And I think reducing the use of them. But I think the banning them, I just wish we didn't have federal drug cases.
Sure. So that's something that they want to start a database on, is of the federal drug cases. They want people to keep track of the race, the age, the circumstances, all of that of the arrests. Of course, both of them are going to end the practice of chokeholds. They want to change the reporting and make like things. They want to have the DOJ and the FBI host all these reportings. But if you look at like asset forfeiture and stuff, those things are already required to be reported. And if an agency doesn't do it, nothing happens. Literally nothing. There's no enforcement mechanism. And so the Republicans put in their bill that you have to report if an officer uses force, uses a weapon, or has an injury, and then failure to do so would mean a 20% cut in their federal funding and 5% cut for each additional year of no reporting. And I think we talked about this briefly in Georgia when they presented the use of force database, but it's not that I don't want it to be public, because it is public already. You just have to compile the information, but I'm just not a fan of statistics about stuff like this when so much relies on the circumstances. Because you cannot compare Rayshard Brooks to George Floyd in the same chart and say that they're the same, because they're not.
Yeah, and we talked about chokeholds, I think, a couple weeks ago. But there needs to be a little more nuance than ban chokeholds. I mean, they have to end once you have someone subdued. Something like that, because it is a viable tactic in jiu-jitsu to gain control of somebody. Particularly if you're a smaller officer. What if you're a female officer and you're in a tussle with somebody who is twice your size, and you've got to use technique to get the upper hand, or he's going to beat the snot out of you, maybe kill you. If she can get behind him and get her arm around his neck, she can subdue him. That's the only advantage that she has. Is going to be technique, because strength and size are going to be not her friend.
Well, and so that kind of segues into the part about they want to have duty to intervene, training, both of them, about when you should step in. I mean, I guess if we have to train on that, I mean, I get that we do, but arguably the Minneapolis officers kind of violated their oath anyway, because of how long that went on. But they want to both make lynching a federal offense, which, did you know that they've tried to do that 200 times in the last 50 years?
No.
I didn't either, but they've tried to make that a federal offense in Congress. And my guess is that they've added it into crazy bills and it didn't work or whatever.
Where is this a problem? Because murder is already illegal. I mean, where is this a problem? I mean, this is not 1960 Mississippi.
Well, there's been like a spike or not a spike, but a heightened awareness about people being found hanging in trees and recently, and I understand that, but again, like you said, murdering someone is already illegal, but this would, it just makes it a federal offense, and it's expensive to put them in federal prison. And then also the Democrat version, again, going back to the inconsistencies, they want to make it a federal offense to conspire to commit a hate crime.
To think about thinking about something. Brilliant.
Yep. And I'll post a link to this because, I mean, it's really hard to talk about comparisons side by side, but I do want to end on one thing, that they both set up a 19-member commission on the social status of black men and boys, and to study like how the system affects them. And that just really disappoints me, because we were talking about it on the show before. The court system has so many flaws and so many problems, and literally every single one of them impacts every person and every race and every gender and every socioeconomic status outside of the special treatment that we see with white-collar crime that is not exclusive to white people.
Also, but, screw your commission. I mean, yeah. A commission to study. Shut up. It's a waste of money to feel good measure. A commission to study. Sorry I stepped on you.
No, I'm just disappointed, because there are a couple of good things in each bill where I'm like, well, that's fair. But it's just overall, and please also understand that, I mean, I put it in a chart, but it's several hundred pages, and I have no doubt that I missed some stuff the first time around. So
if you like reading at home, kids, pick up the bills.
We'll link it for you. Mm-hmm.
So Jessica, closing thoughts?
Kelly Loeffler, God, somebody get that woman a muzzle. She has not introduced a single bill that has anything to do with like the Constitution or issues in America, the budget, anything like that, that is not a national, like at the forefront of the national narrative at the time. The woman, all we know is that she's capable of responding to what everyone's yelling about on Twitter, and it's super frustrating. I wouldn't vote for her. It doesn't matter who she's running against. I'll leave it blank if she's one of the people who it's narrowed down to after the 22-person primary. She wants to, what I'm referencing is that last week she filed a bill to withhold federal highway funding for any jurisdiction that reduces funding for police departments. And I'm against defunding police departments for political reasons, but for goodness sakes, like, that's not how you play politics. And she claims to be an outsider, but she's acting like an insider who's been there and is super experienced about it.
Yep. I
don't like it.
At her level of wealth, there are no outsiders.
Right.
University of Florida is dropping the gator bait cheer. Because,
what?
And as the statement, Ken Fuchs, the president, said, though it's not overtly racist, it could have racial undertones. Gator bait. look, I've lived most of my life in the South. I mean, outside of my home's always been the South, between Florida, Georgia, living in North Carolina at Fort Bragg. I've always been in the South. I have never heard the term gator bait used as a racial epithet. On the Gator chat boards that I'm on, someone put a link to an unverified story that slave owners would use slave babies as gator bait because alligator leather was highly prized. I can't find any reference for that anywhere other than like some memes. I mean, Jerry Reed sung about being used as gator bait in the song Amos Moses. It is ridiculous. I mean, it's not going to change the game day experience for me. But the band will no longer play it. The cheerleaders will no longer lead the gator bait cheer. You can't even go to a football game without this stuff. It's not. The cheer was started in the '90s, and the name of the stadium is the Swamp, and it's the idea is if you're not welcome to the Swamp, if you're not a gator, you're gator bait. Oh, good God. So anyway, thank you for listening. For Jessica Szilagyi, for Eric Cumbie, our editor, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a great week.